Okay, listen up. Imagine you are the most powerful person on earth. You've ruled for 72 years, longer than most people even live. You live in a palace with 2,300 rooms. You've had over 100 mistresses. All of Europe calls you the Sunday King. You think you are basically immortal, a god in human form. And then one day, your leg starts to smell. Not like forgot to shower smell, like rotting meat you can smell from across the room smell. The doctors take one look and basically say, "Your Majesty, your leg is decomposing while you are still alive." And then it gets worse, way worse. This is the story of Louis XIV, a man who thought he was the sun, but died like a piece of forgotten lunch meat in the back of a fridge. And his doctors, they basically tortured him to death with the 17th century version of WebMD. Buckle up. This story is disgusting, absurd, and 100% true first. Let's understand just how ridiculously powerful Louis XIV was. This guy became king in 1643 when he was 4 years old. Most kids that age are still figuring out how toilets work. Louis was running France, well, not really regents did the actual work, but when his chief minister died in 1661, 23-year-old Louis did something that shocked everyone. He announced he would rule alone. No prime minister, no co-pilot. Everyone thought he was joking. He wasn't from that moment. Louis built one of the most absolute monarchies in history. His most famous quote sums it up. L'État est moi. Translation, I am the state. Not I represent the state. Not I serve the state. But I literally am the state. It is like if Elon Musk said, I am Tesla, and then made it legally binding. But Louis wasn't satisfied with just having power. He wanted to perform it. In 1682, he moved the entire French court to Versailles. A palace so obscenely luxurious it makes modern billionaire mansions look like studio apartments. 2,300 rooms, 67 staircases, 352 chimneys, a hall of mirrors with 357 mirrors. When mirrors cost more than gold, 1,400 fountains. Gardens so big you needed to map the cost. About $300 billion in today's money for context. The entire Disneyland resort cost about $17 billion to build. Louis basically built 17 Disneylands just to flex. But Versailles wasn't just a palace. It was a control machine. Louis forced all the major nobles to live at Versailles. Why? Because if they're all in his palace, they can't plot rebellions back in their own territories. It is like keeping all your enemies in one luxury prison. He also turned daily life into public theater, morning ritual lever. 100 nobles watch the king wake up and get dressed dining ritual. The king eats while courtiers stand and watch bedtime ritual. Coucher going to bed is also a spectator sport. Imagine if every single thing you did, brushing your teeth, putting on socks, eating breakfast, was a performance with an audience. That was Louis's life. He turned existing into a power move. The Sunday King Louis chose the sun as a symbol. Why? Because the sun is the center of the solar system and everything revolves around it. This wasn't a humble metaphor. This was a literal cosmological statement. Louis believed he was the center of France, the way the sun is the center of the universe. His propaganda machine was relentless. Painters depicted him as a Roman god, writers composed odes to his wisdom, architects designed monuments to eternalize his glory. By the late 1600s, Louis XIV wasn't just a king. He was a living myth, but myths have a problem. They collide with reality. And for Louis, reality came in the form of rotting flesh. Louis XIV's body problems didn't start with gangrene. They were the climax of decades of medical disasters. 1685, the tooth catastrophe. The story begins in 1685. When Louis was 47, his teeth started rotting, common in an era when aristocratic diets were loaded with sugar. The solution? Rip them all out. But here's the thing, 17th century dentistry didn't believe in anesthesia. Anesthesia was for cowards. Real men got their teeth pulled while fully conscious. So Louis sat there while a barber surgeon, yes, barbers also did surgery, yanked out his teeth with pliers. One by one did Louis scream, probably. But nobody recorded it because admitting the king felt pain would shatter his divine image. But the real disaster came next, during the extraction. The surgeon accidentally ripped out part of Louis's upper palate. Yes, there was now a hole in the roof of his mouth, a hole connecting his mouth to his nasal cavity. The consequences: food would fall from his mouth into his nose. He'd leak air when speaking. Infections became a constant risk, but Louis couldn't admit this. So he continued holding public dining ceremonies while courtiers politely ignored the food dripping out of the king's nose. Imagine to maintain dignity while your nose is eating your dinner. 1686, the anal fistula surgery. The next year, Louis developed an anal fistula, an infected tunnel from the rectum to the skin surface. This was excruciatingly painful. Sitting hurt, standing hurt. Existing was pain. The doctor said surgery was needed, but this wasn't modern surgery. This was no anesthesia, again no sterilization. Germ theory hadn't been discovered yet. No antibiotics. Those wouldn't exist for another 250 years on the 18th of November, 1686. Surgeon Charles Francois Fitzhelix performed the operation. The surgery lasted several hours. Louis screamed through the entire thing. The surgeon was basically carving into the king's rectum with a knife while the king was fully awake. But that is not even the worst part. The worst part, before operating on Louis, Fitzhelix wanted to practice. So he found prisoners around Paris with similar conditions and performed experimental surgeries on them. Some of those prisoners died, but that was fine. They were just prisoners. By the time Fitzhelix operated on Louis, he'd perfected the technique. The surgery was successful. Louis was so happy he gave Fitzhelix a fortune and made him a nobleman. Court composers wrote a song to celebrate the king's recovery. It was called Grand Dieu sauve le roi, God Save the King. The tune was later stolen by the British and became God Save the Queen. Yes. The British national anthem was originally about a French king's ass surgery. History is absurd. 1715. The leg starts dying. Fast forward to August 1715. Louis is now 76, ancient for that era. He notices something wrong with his left leg. At first just pain, then stiffness, then he notices the color changing. The leg is turning black. Doctors are summoned. They examine the leg. Their diagnosis, gangrene. For those who don't know, gangrene is what happens when your tissue dies from lack of blood supply. The tissue turns black, starts rotting, and emits the putrid stench of decaying flesh. Key detail. This happens while you are still alive. Imagine watching your own leg turn into a zombie. Imagine smelling your own flesh rot. That is what Louis was experiencing. And it was about to get so much worse. Now, you'd think the doctors would say, okay, we need to amputate this leg or the infection will spread and you'll die. In modern times, that is what would happen. Amputation, antibiotics, you'd probably survive, but this wasn't modern times. This was 1715 and 17th century medicine was basically witchcraft with a degree. Treatment attempt number 1, bloodletting, the doctor's first response, drain his blood. The theory of 17th century medicine was based on humors. The body had 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, and disease was caused by these fluids being out of balance. The solution: drain some blood to rebalance the system. This sounds insane today, but back then it was standard practice. So the doctors cut open Louis's veins and let blood pour into bowls. The result, nothing. The leg kept rotting. But instead of thinking maybe bloodletting doesn't work, the doctors thought maybe we need to drain more blood. So they did it again and again. Imagine your leg is rotting and the doctor's solution is to make you lose more blood. Treatment attempt number 2. Donkey milk when bloodletting failed. The doctors turned to alternative medicine. Some unknown suggested Louis should drink donkey milk. Why? Because ancient texts said donkey milk had healing properties. No evidence, no logic, just the ancients said it, so it must be true. Louis, desperate, agreed. So every day servants would bring him a cup of fresh donkey milk. He'd drink it, hoping it would somehow stop his leg from rotting. Spoiler, it didn't. Treatment attempt number 3. Herbal poultices next. The doctors decided to try topical treatment. They made poultices of various herbs, oils, and powders and slathered them on the rotting leg. The recipe included crushed herbs, animal fat, wine, because alcohol maybe. Random spices. Basically, they were turning Louis's leg into a stew. The result, the leg kept rotting. In fact, the poultices probably made things worse because they created a warm, moist environment on the rotting flesh. The perfect breeding ground for bacteria. But the doctors didn't know about bacteria. Germ theory wouldn't be discovered for another 150 years. Treatment attempt number 4. Prayer. When medicine failed, turn to religion. Louis's confessor was summoned to perform last rites. Churches across the country held prayer services. Nuns in monasteries prayed day and night for the king's recovery. Louis himself spent hours in prayer, begging God for forgiveness and healing. But God apparently wasn't taking calls. Treatment attempt number 5. Miracle water in a final act of desperation. Someone suggested miracle water from a holy site. This water supposedly came from a spring where a saint had once performed miracles. It was bottled in special containers, blessed by monks, and sold at ridiculous prices. Basically, it was the 17th century version of goop. Louis drank the water, he washed his leg with the water, he prayed the water would work. Spoiler, it didn't, because, and this might shock you, magic water doesn't cure gangrene. By late August, it was obvious the leg was killing Louis. The gangrene was spreading, the infection was entering his bloodstream. Some doctors suggested amputation. In 1715, amputation was a horrific procedure. No anesthesia, no sterilization, high mortality rate, but it was Louis's only chance of survival. The doctors presented the option to the king. Louis's response, number why? Because kings don't have missing body parts. In Louis's worldview, the king's body was sacred, whole, perfect. Amputation would shatter that perfection. It would admit the king was mortal, vulnerable, incomplete. It would destroy the entire myth. So Louis refused. He would rather die than admit he wasn't perfect. By the last week of August, the smell became unbearable. This wasn't regular body odor. This was the smell of rotting meat, sweet, nauseating, impossible to ignore. Courtiers had to cover their noses with perfume-soaked handkerchiefs before entering the king's room. Servants would gag while cleaning, but Louis insisted on continuing the daily rituals. Morning ceremony proceeded, even though the king could barely move. Dining ceremony proceeded, even though the king could barely eat. Bedtime ceremony proceeded, even though everyone knew the king might not wake up. It was like the Titanic was sinking, but the captain kept insisting everything's fine. Keep dancing. By late August, Louis's leg was completely black. From toes to thigh swollen, twice its normal size, oozing poos and rotting tissue, seeping through the skin, falling apart. Skin and flesh literally peeling off the bone. Doctors tried wrapping it in bandages, but the bandages would soak through with pus and blood. They had to be changed every few hours. Imagine watching your own leg literally disintegrate. The gangrene didn't just stay in the leg. The infection entered Louis's bloodstream. This is called sepsis, blood poisoning. Symptoms include high fever, chills, confusion, organ failure. Louis started hallucinating. He'd talk to people who weren't in the room. He'd forget where he was. His body was shutting down one organ at a time. On the 1st of September 1715, Louis knew the end was coming. He summoned his heir, his great-grandson, 5-year-old Louis XIV, to his bedside. He gave the child some advice. Do not imitate my love of building, nor my love of war. Try to live in peace with your neighbors. Translation, I screwed up, don't be like me. Then, at 8:15 a.m. on the 1st of September, Louis XIV died. Cause of death, gangrene, sepsis. And refusing to amputate, he had ruled for 72 years and 110 days, the longest reign in European history. He built Versailles. He made France the dominant power in Europe. He turned monarchy into an art form, but in the end, he was defeated by a rotting leg. Let's recap Louis the Sooth. The most powerful man in Europe, the Sunday king, the I am the state guy, died like a piece of forgotten lunch meat. His doctors, instead of helping him, basically tortured him with medieval remedies disguised as medicine and him. He was so obsessed with his image that he refused amputation and chose to rot alive instead. One power doesn't make you immortal, no matter how rich or powerful you are. Biology doesn't care. 2. Pride kills literally. Louis could have amputated and possibly lived longer, but his ego wouldn't allow it. 3. Sometimes the myth is more important than the man. Louis spent his entire life building the image of the perfect divine king. When reality threatened that image, he chose the image over survival. Final thought, Louis XIV ruled for 72 years. He built Versailles, he made France the center of Europe, but in the end, he was defeated by a rotting leg. History is brutal. Biology is more brutal. The Sunday King died like rotting meat. And that is the most ironic ending in history. Subscribe to Wacky History for more stories. They don't teach in school, because history isn't just about the past. It is about understanding how absurdly fragile we all are, no matter how much we pretend otherwise.